So in this lab, we will enter a first formula for our Excel course. So deselect if you have selected anything on the workbook and click on the cell number B8. So this is the next to the total. The goal here is to total this amount from phones, cars, rent and miscellaneous. There are two ways to get started in a simple way. If you are completely new to Excel, this is what you would do. Enter the equal sign, which means you're telling the Excel that you want to do some calculation, and then you will enter the amount one by one. So 80, 200, 500 and 30 and enter. So you have a total of 810. This is one way. Put your cursor in C8 for May 2020. We are going to calculate the amount for these expenses. Again, start with the plus sign. This time we'll take the cell references. So instead of putting the numbers, because it may give you an error at the later time if you like say 500 or 1000 rows, we will click on the first cell that we want to take the amount in consideration. So 85 is already, so 85 is in C4, and then we'll enter plus sign. Similarly, we will continue with 200, which is C5, plus sign, and 500, and the last is C7. Once all the numbers have been entered, just press enter. So for expenses for May 2020 is 825. Now similarly, we want to add the total for just the phone expenses. This one was by month, this one is by the expense type. So for example, phones or cars. To get the expenses for the phones, first we'll start with the plus sign and we'll select the cell that we are interested, which is B4 with the $80, plus sign. 85 is in C4, plus sign, and D4, and enter. So for April, May, and June, the expenses for the phones are $250. Now so far so good. You're entering equal sign and you're entering the cell references one by one, but this will be cumbersome if you have many calculations to go. So there is a way in Excel that you can speed up this way, and that's where the concept of relative reference comes up. In Excel there are relative reference and absolute reference. So what is relative reference? Relative reference in Excel is a cell address without the dollar sign in the row and column coordinates, like B4 and B4 here. When a formula with relative cell references is copied to another cell, the references change based on a relative position of rows and columns. By default, all references in Excel are relative. For example, what I'm going to do is click on C8, which has this calculation C4, C5, C6 and C7. I'm going to press Ctrl C on my keyboard, copy, and put my cursor on next to it in D8 and press Ctrl V. So you paste it. So as you can see, the Excel knows that you are going to get the calculations for the row number D. So if you press the escape key on your keyboard, if you put your cursor in 825 one, you have C4 to C7. If you put your cursor in D, total in D, you will see it change to C to D. Similarly, what I'm going to do is copy the cells in E4, which has the total for the phones, and copy. I will paste it in E5. So 200, 200, 200, which is 600, so which gives me the expenses for the car. But if I press the escape button, so 252 came from B, C and D, and 600 came from B5, C5 and D5. So instead of entering equal sign and then taking all the cell references and adding cell one by one, I'm just going to copy this and select these 3 cells at a time and press Ctrl V. So Excel knows that we want to have the calculations, and press the escape P for rent in this particular row, miscellaneous, and this is the grand total. And grand total comes from B, C and D. B, C and D.